Too many sellers act out of emotion, excited about a new home, moving out of state, or maybe even a job change without thinking through the details. And here's the reality, you're going to regret selling your home without a plan. In 20 years of doing this, I've seen it happen time and time again. And it almost always costs sellers time, money, as well as sanity. Real estate is about timing and strategy, not impulse. When sellers rush to the market, they often sacrifice price, time on the market, in some cases both. So my question to you is, have you thought about your next move before putting your home on the market, or are you just reacting emotionally? I recently had a couple come to me who wanted to list their home for sale. They wanted to move to get their kid in a better school district, just a better area in general, and they had gone out shopping for home, and they had absolutely fallen in love with a property, and that's when they decided to contact me, after they had already fallen in love with a home. And so part of our conversation was, the question of how soon can you get it to the market? And our conversation started, trying to figure out what their goals were. But generally when I get that question, I say I need probably somewhere around 10 days to 2 weeks to get your home ready to come to the market properly. And that's assuming we don't need to do a bunch of upgrades or a bunch of fixes in the property and that it's in overall good shape. Well, this particular property was in good shape. It showed well, didn't really need staging. We just needed the time to be able to do all of the front end marking so that we could drive exposure on the home, which they actually said they understood. So we started the process by getting professional photos on the property, 3D tour on the property, and then I had my videographer coming out a couple days later, and from there what we would do is take all those professional photos and all of that stuff and create the marketing for that property. And then we would send it out to brokers and potential clients in the area just to help get that exposure out there before we actually hit the market on that home. Well, here's what happened. As soon as we got the photos taken, later that day, they contacted me and said, "Hey, Jeb, how soon are we going to get those photos back? Because we'd like to go to the market as soon as we get them back. We don't have time to wait. We've fallen in love with that property. We don't want to miss out. So we want you to put our home on the market as soon as we get the photos." Well, as the professional that I am, I tried to push them back a little bit and say, "Hey, listen, I think we need to go with the original plan. I think we need to do all of the things that we originally discussed so that we can create that exposure." Because understand, exposure drives demand, demand drives price. So the more exposure you get on a home, the higher price you're going to get on that home. Now, you might be thinking, well, Jeb, you're just going to put my home on the MLS anyway with photos and everybody's going to see it. Well, there is some truth to that. But what I will tell you is that we get a lot of traction off social media and some other things that we do when we're trying to create buzz around a property, when we're trying to drive demand to that home. And so if we can create a list of people that want that home all at the same time, and then we open it up and they all go in there, well, then you kind of have this frenzy, especially when that home is priced right. And so in this particular case, we didn't get to do all of the additional market that I would have liked to complete it on that property prior to going to the market. So we listed it as they requested as soon as we got the photos on the market. And unfortunately, the home just sat. It sat for a couple of weeks. Now, you could say it's partly the market. You could say it was partly the marketing that we didn't do on that property. But here's the thing. We still went through the additional steps that I mentioned that we were going to do. We still ended up doing the video on the property. We still ended up sending flyers to the neighborhood telling them that the property was listed, in addition to doing social media advertising and sending it out to all the brokers and all of those different things. And once we completed all of that stuff, we started to get a lot more traction on the property. In fact, the Zillow views at that time started to go up because there were a lot more people seeing that home. But here's the unfortunate part about that process. They ended up missing out on the property that they absolutely love for a couple of different reasons. One reason is they waited to list their home until they found something they loved. Now, unfortunately, we don't know, had we listed it 2 weeks earlier, if we would have been in escrow and been in a position to put an offer in. In fact, we don't even know if the seller would have accepted our offer had we not been in escrow or just been in escrow, because it would have been contingent. But here's the thing. It would have given us a lot better position to make that offer had we already been on the market, had we already been under contract, versus going out, finding a home, falling in love, without having your ducks in a row on the other side. Now, at the end of the day, this couple ended up finding another property that they loved and they were super happy with, but it didn't come without a lot of emotion, a lot of heartache, a lot of going back and forth, trying to help them understand the process and what we could have done differently to start. Now, that's just one example. I have another example of a seller recently moving out of the area. He's moved across country to be out of state. He wanted to be closer to his grandkids, closer to his family, and he went out, just like the first couple did, and found a property that he fell in love with. Now, in this case, he was in a position to make an offer on that property without selling his home. So that's exactly what he did. He ended up closing on that property. And then after the fact, he contacted me and said, hey, Jeb, I recently bought a property out of state. I've recently moved. I need to get my home on the market. Now, in this particular case, we were able to do all of the things that I suggested that we do up front. All of the photos, the video marketing, the social media marketing, all of the things that we needed to do to drive exposure on that home. But here's the thing, that property ended up sitting on the market for about 2.5 months before we ever really got traction on the home. We ended up getting an offer and closing on that property. But here's the thing, that seller had a ton of stress because he thought his home was going to sell in the first weekend. He thought it was going to sell very, very quickly. And he ended up carrying a mortgage longer than he had originally anticipated because of how he approached the process. Had he done it a little bit differently, had a plan, contacted an agent like myself and said, hey, Jeb, I'm thinking about buying a property out of state. I'm going to need to sell this property. I don't need to do it immediately to buy that home, but I need to start thinking about it. I need to put my home on the market. And we could have had that conversation. Unfortunately, he was in the time when the market was kind of shifting from a seller's market to a buyer's market. Interest rates were still high. Things were just sitting on the market a little bit longer. On top of seasonality in the market was transitioning from that spring market into the summer market, which is a slower time in the year overall. So instead of him having to carry 2 mortgages, we could have actually had that conversation up front and said, hey, listen, why don't we get your home on the market now? Do the things we need to do while you're out there shopping for a home. And if you find something, at least you're in a position now where you kind of have an idea of what the market's doing. If your home's not selling, then maybe you don't make an offer on that other property until we know exactly what's going to happen over here. Which leads me to the key point that the decision to move should come after a plan is in place, and not the other way around. So what does a real plan actually look like? Well, that's exactly what I'm going to discuss right after you hit that thumbs up if you find any value in my videos at all. And if you want to stay updated on how to sell your home for top dollar in the quickest amount of time, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. So the first thing I want you to understand when creating a plan is understanding your why. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? Are you trying to downsize? Are you trying to upsize? Are you looking for a specific location? Are you moving for work? What exactly are you trying to accomplish? And the reason I want you to understand this is because your goal determines your strategy. We need to know what it is you're trying to accomplish, how quickly you're trying to accomplish it, so that we can set a plan in place in order to help you maximize that time. The last thing we want you to do is go out and make a decision that you're going to regret later down the road because we didn't think through all the little things, because we just thought it would work out. Now, in many cases, it is going to work out. Now, that doesn't mean it's not going to come without heartache and stress. Now, the next thing I want you to know is kind of have an idea of where you're going. If you think you're moving out of state, I want you to go out of state. I want you to look at what it is you're trying to buy. Is it actually out there? Have you been pre-approved? Have you looked at your net that you're taking from your current home? Have you been through the pre-approval process? Can you actually find what you're looking for in the area that you're looking? A lot of people have been moving out of state thinking that the grass is greener, thinking that things are just going to be way cheaper or less expensive than they are, only to find out once they get out there that what they're looking for isn't actually there. Or in some cases, the homes are more expensive and they don't have the funds necessary in order to be able to buy exactly what they want. So I don't want you to assume that it'll just work out. I want you to do your research on where you're relocating. Are you renting? Are you buying? What does that actually look like? On top of that, not just looking at housing, but looking at your overall expenses, everything from insurance to, what schools, daycares, childcare, all of that stuff costs, because at the end of the day, that can impact your decision. And then once you have all of that in place, then you can think about selling your home. And then you can think strategically about how to market your home, how you can get it on the market to maximize both price and time. Ideally, you want to give yourself about 30 to 60 days in advance if you can. That way you can address any concerns in that property. If there are things that need to be fixed or updated, or you need to paint or replace carpet, you have time to do it. The last thing you want to do is make that decision, fall in love with a property, to find out that the agent is recommending that you declutter, that you need to paint or remodel something prior to putting that home on the market. Now, in some cases, you can choose not to do that anyway. But as we've discussed many, many times in this channel, remember, you only get one time to make a first impression. So you don't want to just clean and declutter. You want to think about how your home is going to show online as well as in person. And the next thing I want you to consider is the timing, right? When are you planning on coming to the market? A lot of people think, hey, I just found a house, I need to put my home on the market, without thinking through the timing, the seasonality, everything that's happening. Right now, we're transitioning in many markets from what has been a seller's market over the last 10 or so years to more of a buyer's market. Now, in some cases, it still favors sellers, but what I'll tell you is because inventory is up, buyer demand is down, interest rates are still impacting affordability, buyers have more options out there at the moment, right? They have more leverage in the market. And if you're moving into the fall, winter market, that could be a slower time overall for just activity in general, depending on where you're located. So what I would recommend is before going out, finding everything, putting your home on the market and rushing, having that conversation sooner than later. As soon as you start get the inkling that you think you're going to move, whether it's 3, 6 months, a year down the road, start thinking about that process. Start having a conversation with a professional in your market to talk about timing, to understand when the best time to put that home on the market is, as well as what you can do to that home to drive exposure that ultimately creates demand and drives price. So with that, you need to consider seasonality. You need to consider your local market activity, in addition to talking about how many days on market homes are sitting on average. What does that actually look like? And once your home goes under contract, what are you looking like on timing there? What is traditional in your market? Because a lot of people think, hey, I just put my home on the market, it's going to sell the very first weekend, somebody's going to make a 30-day offer, and I'm going to be closed in 30 days. Well, in some cases, maybe that's true. In other cases, I'm seeing homes right now sit 30, 60, 90 days on market in many markets out there. In addition to that, many times you have a 30-day escrow. So you're looking 3-4 months out in some cases before your home actually closes. And in my experience, rush sellers end up listing too late. And in many cases, they end up under pressure and don't allow the home to build market exposure. Remember, more exposure equals more demand, which equals more offers, which ultimately equals more money in your pocket. As a seller, I want you to understand the more time you give yourself to build anticipation of that home, along with marketing the property properly, the more demand you're going to create on that home. Remember, you're not just selling a house. You're selling timing, you're selling presentation, you're selling confidence. If you're somebody that is considering selling your home, I actually created a seller's playbook to help you create this plan, to help you go through the process of what you need to be thinking about when putting your home on the market. If you want to get a copy of it, it's free. Use that link in the description of the video. So now that we talked about how important a plan is, what happens when you don't have a plan? Well, when you don't have a plan, what typically happens is you don't get the proper exposure on your home, which leads to homes sitting on the market longer, which ultimately leads to price drops, lowball offers, and you as a seller having to adjust your price continuously to keep up with the market. Now, ultimately, what that's going to lead to is more buyer leverage. The longer a home sits on the market, a buyer thinks one of two things. Either there's something wrong with the home or that it's overpriced. And what I'll say is neither of those have to be true, because in some cases, maybe that home went under contract and it fell out at the last minute. Maybe that happened a couple of times. And so the days on the market have continued to add up. And a buyer online maybe doesn't have the context of that. All they see is that the days on the market are adding up and that your home is actually listed. And this brought up a story of some clients that I helped that ended up selling their home about a year ago with another agent. I'm actually helping them now find another property because they're not happy with where they are. But they ended up selling their home about a year ago with another agent, and they were rushing to the market at that time. So instead of hiring somebody based on experience and marketing and all of that, they went with a friend, and they were rushing to the market at that time because they were going into new construction. And in this particular case, they used an agent who ended up taking photos of their home with her phone, didn't do any of the additional marketing. And in our conversation, she said her home sold for about $300,000 than it should have based on recent comparables in the market. And the reason this came up is because I asked him, I said, why didn't you contact the agent that helped you buy this home now to sell it and help you look for another property? And this was the example she gave me. She said, basically, we were rushed at the time, we used this agent, and we ended up losing money, and now we regret it. So here's what every seller should have before they end up listing their home. You need to have a reason for moving. You need to have that clear goal. Why are you actually doing? On top of that, we want to have that destination confirmed or something very close, right? I don't need you to have the actual house that you want to move in picked out. In many cases, that's not the right strategy either. I don't want you to fall in love with a property, get emotional, and lose the leverage to negotiate if you have to sell another home. But I do want you to have an idea of where you're going so that you're not putting yourself between a rock and a hard place if you end up getting an offer on your home. On top of that, you should know your financial strategy. Are you buying after? Are you renting? What does that actually look like? Have you been through that pre-approval process to get real numbers? In addition to that, have you thought about capital gains? Are you going to end up having to pay taxes on some of the money you've made out of that property? Or are you going to have that entire amount to work with? I've heard many stories over the years of people taking the full lump sum out of their home, putting it into another property, only to find out later that they ended up having capital gains and had to pay taxes on some of that money. So you just need to make sure you're thinking through these things in advance. On top of that, you need to have a home prep plan. Do you need to do repairs? Do you need to declutter? What is it that you need to do to your home to get it on the market in the right way? On top of that, do you have a marketing strategy? Do you have a timeline with your real estate professional so that you can drive exposure that creates demand that ultimately gets you higher offers on that property? Because you need a timeline. You need to put things in order. You need to do the proper steps so that you can get your home on the market in the right way. Now, if you're considering selling your home, you're not sure where to start, you can actually work directly with me and my team by using that link in the description. And if you're located out of my market area, I've been networking with real estate agents like myself for over 20 years. I've got a list of agents that work directly like I do in every single state out there. So if you're not sure where to start, you're looking to sell your home, make sure you use that link in the description of the video. Remember, real estate rewards preparation, not panic. If you want to maximize both price and timing, you need to have a plan. If you're thinking of selling, let's talk strategy first before you list. You can actually get in touch with me and my team using that link in the description of the video. Now with that, if you're a seller who thinks you need to update your home before putting it on the market and you're wondering which upgrades you should do, which ones you should stay away from, well, check out this video right here.